Welcome back to Two Chuds in the Beer Castle. Back at again with our third podcast for Professor Colin Smith's philosophy courses. I'll be your host, Josh Hartsock, and our co-host is
Liam Schwartz.
incredible. Um, so I'm going to argue that the hard deterministic viewpoint should be rejected, and I'm going to do that by first introducing the determinism versus free will kind of dilemma in a nutshell. And then I'll talk about my issues with hard determinism and my personal favorite solution to hard determinism. And then I'll end it off by talking a bit about human nature and how I think that ties in towards supporting the argument against hard determinism. So, without further ado, let me describe the kind of dilemma in a nutshell. So, uh, and I'll be quoting a bit or paraphrasing a bit from Cleve here, but so basically, traditionally, you have your determinist, and determinism is just like, hey, every action has a cause, and you could kind of trace these causes all the way back uh, to, some might say like a first cause, initial cause, or maybe it just goes back infinitely. But the important part is that everything is caused from something, and the hard determinist says that not only is everything's causal in nature, but because everything is causal, and because we can kind of point back to some kind of cause that produced an effect here, and keep going back that chain, that free will is a myth and a luxury of a non-scientific age, and that we should just learn to cope with that and reject free will on the basis of hard determinism and science. On the flip side of that, you have libertarianism, in which case they reject determinism entirely in favor of free will, and they argue that specifically, like, we humans have a kind of special agency that we'll just call free will, and that enables us to perform actions that aren't impeded by anything, that aren't affected by this kind of uh, cause and effect. And both sides have issues with the other. A libertarian might take issue with the hard determinist in the sense that, according to the hard determinist view, horrific events that have spawned across the world aren't the aren't the fault of the individuals causing the horrific events, because those individuals are just products of circumstances that were caused from prior events. So it's hard to really put any blame on anyone if you can always just say, well, they only did this because of X, Y, and Z cause. And in that sense, they kind of take issues with hard determinism in a kind of moral stance, whereas someone opposing the libertarian in their whole notion of a uh, free will kind of special agency that enables them to act unimpeded by anything, will essentially lead to free will being just randomness, in which case you could get someone like um, Mother Teresa tossing a hand grenade into an orphanage completely out of nowhere without any desire to do so, as being compatible with free will. And obviously, the libertarians don't like that either. Uh, but then there's a kind of third view that meshes the two views of determinism and free will together. And it says that it's called compatibilism, and it says that yes, determinism is a thing. However, it is not. It can coexist with free will, as in there are certain actions that will fall under the free will category, and everything else is um, deterministic. And uh, Cleve has a really nice diagram that's reminiscent of like um, those funny little political compasses where it's like. Yes, free will, no coexistence is libertarianism. Uh, no free will, no coexistence is hard determinism. And yes, free will, yes, coexistence is compatibilism. Um, I guess before I continue, Liam, do you have any thoughts on the issues of hard determinism versus free will?
I mean, I have thoughts, but I mean, it's not really the focus of this. I'll probably just have some responses to what you have to say.
Okay, that's cool. Uh, so I'm gonna move in with my first issue on hard determinism, and it's the notion that it presupposes that we can know everything to predict, uh, what is going to happen from some initial time until all the way through to the end by just arguing that like, oh well, theoretically we should be able to map out the projections of all these particles that make up someone's brain that influence their state of mind and whatnot, and that we'd be able to just map them out and track them, just using the fundamental forces of nature and whatnot. Um, to me, that is a very uh, hefty claim to make. That's that's built into the hard determinists argument that I haven't really seen much talked about. And the reason I don't like it is because when we're making claims, we don't have to make claims based solely on like yeses or no certainties. We can make claims based on probabilities. And to quote Carl Sagan, uh, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the claim that we can or will ever know everything is an extremely extraordinary claim to make, uh, and it's really not backed by anything outside of speculation and what ifs. In my opinion, it's a safer claim to say that we won't be able to know everything because we know already as is, being that we're kind of limited to a three-dimensional existence, that we cannot see things from higher dimensional perspectives. Like we can make models to like get anecdotal understandings of it, but we can't actually see things from like a higher dimensional perspective. So in that case, like we will never truly be able to know everything in that sense, which is why I don't like I don't like that kind of presupposed claim within the hard determinist argument, and on terms of what is more likely that we will know everything or that we will never know everything. The claim that we won't know everything has a much higher probability. So that's my first issue with hard determinism. Um, and there's also the funny anecdote that if you find a hard determinist and punch them in the face, if they get angry at you, they aren't staying consistent with their beliefs, because if you're a hard determinist, then there is no kind of moral repercussion for everything, because everything is just a effect of a past cause, without any kind of individual agency. But going into the uh, viewpoint that I think should be taken instead of hard determinism, uh, we have compatibilism, and McKenna and Coates, they break compatibilism into three main sections. They have a section talking about classical compatibilism. They talk about compatibilism in transition, where it's transitioning to the more uh, current contemporary compatibilism. So I'll start with classic compatibilism, in which case they state that that the acting according to your will, unimpeded by anything, is an action of free will, and any other type of action that is impeded by something is not part of free will. But before I continue, Liam, do you have anything you want to say to that?
Well, there's a lot of comments I could make, but another argument against determinism I've heard is the thing is you talked about the supposition that everything is determined by some sort of causality, through usually through some sort of you know uh natural laws. Like for instance, like if I threw a ball, you'd know the trajectory if you had enough information, like that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But that supposes a purely materialistic universe, and sometimes that might not be a wise claim. And of course, that's gonna. I mean, that's already another argument, but that's one argument I've heard because, I mean, again, it doesn't say anything about like things not being completely, indeterministic, but it definitely introduces the idea that it's not uh, it's not certain.
Right. No, and I haven't even thought about that in general, but like if we connect this back um, to previous talks we've had um in this class, and Liam, I know I've talked with you a little bit about them here and there, but the debates over um, personal identity, whether or not like people have souls, or if that kind of uniqueness is like a social construct, those are still very heated and unsettled debates. Also, the debates on whether or not like the universe itself is just some kind of like random lucky hodgepodge of physical laws that enable us to exist, or if there's some kind of like um, creator that kind of made us outside of the scope of physical reality. That is another kind of debate that is still ongoing and heated, as you said, and both of them kind of point in the direction that like we're not exactly certain whether or not we live in a purely materialistic world, and in which case, if we do not live in the purely materialistic world, then it's a bit faulty to kind of take that standpoint of like, oh, everything could be determined from physical laws that interact you know purely in the materialistic world, which is something interesting I hadn't thought about. Um, Going back to McKenna and Coates's uh, different phases of compatibilism. To wrap up the classical view, that the issue with the classical view that most everyone takes is always like, what do you mean by an unimpeded action? In which case now the discussion is kind of shifting away from uh, necessarily like, okay, like can free will even exist, to like, okay, well, if we're going to say that they can coexist, then how do you define an action that is like unimpeded and done purely from your own desires and whatnot? And one of the kind of arguments against this that anti-compatibilists will take is that we can't have any agency over physical laws, and as such, we can't have any agency over the future. And in that case, the materialistic view of compatibilism is denied. And obviously, the issues Liam brought up about presupposing that we exist solely in a materialistic world, those issues talk about still exist for this claim. But granting that kind of materialistic worldview, the transitory response for compatibilism is that free will is only important in the context of morality. Um, and in that case, that's not my favorite view of compatibilism, solely because I think it can be, while not impossible, I think it can kind of be difficult or maybe even unconvincing to a layperson that morality is anything more than a more subjective social construct. And I'm going to talk a bit opposite to that viewpoint later on, but I'm going to move on to the contemporary uh, view, right following through, so we don't run out of time. Um, so, what a lot of contemporary compatibilists are saying in response to this whole notion of like, oh, we have no agency over the future, thus we have no free will in a materialistic sense. A lot of them are bringing up anecdotes that we see a lot more in modern day, thanks to the popularity of storytelling in movies and whatnot is stuff like uh, what if the like it's not unreasonable to say that maybe there's a future out there where we can affect the past, thinking kind of like Terminator One, where someone in the present goes back in time, affects actions in the past, which changes outcomes of the future. In which that case, the claim that we have no agency over the future would be rejected. Um, Another kind of thought experiment in this same vein is what if we can act unaccordingly with physical laws? And you see this again a lot in fiction where you'll have um, people moving at like beyond light speeds and whatnot. And in which, in that case, if we can ever get to a point where we aren't acting precisely according with like the physical laws, and then the claim that we have no agency over the future because we have no agency over physical laws falls apart as well. And that kind of thought experiment might seem a bit far fetched, but if you kind of think back to what Liam said about the issue of viewing the world purely as materialistic, if the world itself is not purely materialistic, then it is not uh, unreasonable to think that there are actions that don't abide by physical laws, because physical laws just govern the material world. And the second to last viewpoint they bring up is kind of interesting to me, especially in connecting it to a lot of the modern talks we've had in class regarding race and gender. Is that freedom is a hierarchy of actions that are least free to most free, rather than just categorizing something as 100% free or 100% not free. These hierarchical freedom compatibilists will argue that we have different layers of freedom based on the different orders of desires, and depending on those different desires determines whether an action is more free than not, or uh, more deterministic than free. Uh, my personal issue with that is that it kind of skirts around the issue of uh, can we have free will? Because when you ask someone if we can have free will, it's not, the question isn't can we almost have free will? It's just, can we have free will? Um, and I know I've said a lot, so before I continue, is there anything you want to speak on regarding those points?
Um, yeah, I mean they're kind of similar to the last ones. Yeah, I honestly don't have anything else to say.
No, that's cool. That's cool. So the last kind of contemporary compatibilist argument that McKenna and Coates really go into is this freedom from reason, in which case, like, the ability to reason and act freely is those acting in accordance to a true good, some kind of higher good, and in that case, it posits more of an objective morality, that there is some kind of higher good out there, and that acting in accordance with that higher good as opposed to acting against it, um, that distinction is where uh, free will kind of inserts itself. And I think that can be kind of appealing in the sense that you don't view the world as purely materialistic. Uh, Especially you can get into more debates about uh you know is the world just materialistic or not, but if we don't grant that the world is inherently materialistic, then the issue of there being an objective morality can kind of come play into uh the free will argument, because a lot of the rejections of hard determinism, uh, just that are inherently to people as they hear the arguments, is like, well, then there's no kind of basis of morality, and that'd be a very unproductive and kind of dangerous mindset to live in, that there are no consequences for actions. And the last thing I want to talk about with the compatibilism argument in general is just give a few anecdotes with um, how compatibilism is kind of appealing to me as a physicist. So in a lot of uh, you know laws, we have stipulations and conditions on them. It's not as simple as here is an equation that is applicable in every scenario. It's like, we have multiple different formula and equations for finding, you know, the same thing, such as like a power per unit volume, but it's dependent on whether or not certain conditions are set, um, like maybe some of the conditions are is the excited gas you're looking at, is it really dense or is it like not dense at all, in which case different formula to use, or like what kind of mechanism is producing the power, in which case then again different formula are used. So the a lot of hard determinists kind of view their argument as like, oh, this is the scientific view. uh, I would disagree in the sense that science itself is never, you know, it never makes a concrete claim that is always applicable in every scenario. There are always kind of uh, asterisks to the statements being said. It's like, oh, here, this is applicable, like, 80% of the time, 90% of the time, whatever. But there's always like that special case where it's not applicable. And then to conclude this section, if I had to state what I would believe to be the best way to summarize the compatibilism argument, is that actions that are in accordance with free will are actions that are would be consistent with a particular person's actions. And it's very vague intentionally, because it's like, what do you mean by consistent? Well, if it's consistent, does that mean the person can't change? And to that I would say no, it can be consistent to change, which feels a bit paradoxical. And it's not something that we would be able to you know empirically measure on someone now. It would only be something you'd be able to measure once someone has gone through every action that they will ever do or could ever do. In which case you can look at it from a full unbiased perspective, and then truly determine what is consistent with their actions. And it's something that would kind of change, especially it's unrealistic to say that people can't or can never change. In which case, I like that summary the most. And before I talk a bit about human nature, is Liam, is there anything you want to say last regarding compatibilism? Whether you like it as an answer to hard determinism, you don't like it, you have your own personal answer.
I mean, yeah. So, I mean, there's always my favorite little argument where it's, let's say we go out to ice cream and there's two, like, I know soft serve usually comes in like just chocolate and vanilla, and sometimes there's twist, but let's say there's no twist here, and it's just, all right, do you want chocolate or vanilla? And it's like, I mean, I like both equally. I don't really have any preference. I mean, did something cause, my selection of chocolate over vanilla or vanilla over chocolate? I wouldn't say so, honestly. It was more just like, I out of the two, it's just the one I selected, possibly at random. And of course, there's the argument, oh, maybe randomness isn't really like a solution to this, but I wouldn't say it isn't, because I mean that does, because if something's random, you still have multiple options. Like, that's the thing,
Mm.
which I don't think that's a an argument uh, against free will. And of course, and it's way easier to argue for things that are deterministic, because I mean, I'm definitely motivated to, do things. So if something motivates me to do an action, then there you go. So something deterministic just occurred.
Yeah,
But that's not always applicable. That's my point.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me nicely into my last thing I want to talk about um, regarding human nature and instinct. Uh, Specifically with the whole analogy you made with choosing between the chocolate and vanilla ice cream. That maybe it's not something that's influenced, and rather something that more so is a decision, an instinctual based decision. Um, and the I'm going to say a work of fiction. Boyd analyzes Ted Kubo's Bleach, and I cited that the last podcast I did. I'm going to say it again. But essentially, Kubo depicts kind of the instinctual part of human nature in his series as a kind of like you're hungry, eat type mentality, which you know that isn't something that I guess the way to put it is that when you act on instinct, like that feeling of hunger leading to you eating, it's not consciously motivated. It has nothing to do with um, you processing options and acting based on whatever most motivates you. It's just something that is hardwired into your body for the sake of survival. And most things, when they evolve and natural selection takes place, it chooses traits most beneficial to survival. It doesn't uh, kind of predicate itself on anything other than um, fact or fiction. It's purely random's not the right word, but it's not consciously motivated. And my point in that is that a lot of people, for free will kind of just sweep hard determinism under the rug. It's just like, oh, this is really silly. Not having consequences to your action is dumb, um, without ever really giving that any thought. And I really like the idea that that kind of mindset is explained by the human nature and instinct. Like most people, if you ask them, do you think free will exists? Like even if they've never thought about free will in like a metaphysical sense, their instincts will tell them yes, yes, it exists. Um, and this like and even the hard determinists kind of concede that like free will has been a thing since you know recorded history when they acknowledge the fact that or when they make the claim that free will is a luxury of a non-scientific age. So it's like we as people as humans have always kind of had this instinctual pull towards there being free will, um, and I think that is a an interesting indicator towards that free will perhaps being something that shouldn't be just outright rejected because most if not all evolutionary traits are gained uh, kind of for the creature's benefit. um, and that was just that kind of popped in my head as a take on the whole like subjective morality part of like, oh, having consequences is like just good for society, and kind of tie it more into like a um I guess kind of back it in a more objective light rather than a subjective light. How well I did that, I'm not quite too sure, but that kind of concludes my argument for why I don't like hard determinism, and I think that viewpoint should be rejected. Liam, is there anything else you want to say?
Well, if you're gonna bring up Bleach, well, there's the famous scene between the main character, his I guess Hollow alternative.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it's called, but what he says, what's the difference between you and I? Oh, it's instinct, implying that the main character has some sort of part of him that rationally weighs between two choices, which is I guess it's like a neat way to end it. But at this, I guess minor spoilers. The hollowed version of the main character is just a part of himself. So he's just like a synthesis between both. We're both rational creatures and we can weigh out choices, but we also have that instinct, which again, if you punch me in the face, I'd get angry, and that's instinct. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, Thank you for listening. This podcast was really long. Please don't dock me points, Professor Smith.